Hey, what are you doing? Just about to record a funny intro for the vampire video. But that is one of my videos. No, it's a spooky mini. I do all the spooky stuff like Curse City. Sorry, what did you just say? Curse City. Curse City? What's that? What do you mean, what's that? Curse City, the new Warhammer Quest game? No idea what you're talking about. What in Sigmar's name are you saying? We've made 3 videos about it. We even spent 2 hours doing a live stream. I got nothing, mate. You are holding the box right now. Had you been leaking animals again? Okay, listen, I want to be in good terms with Games Workshop because I want them to send me free stuff, and it seems like they want to pretend the game never existed, so I'm gonna need you to get all the way off my back about that. So they're telling me they are going to pretend that a game that they hyped for months and even said it was going to be established range never existed. They sure seems like it, yes. Oh, suddenly dropping a product without even saying a word is tight. It sure is. But what about the tens of thousands of people that bought it? Aren't they going to notice? Oh, whoops. Whoopsie. Hello fellas, and welcome to my channel, and also welcome to another Heavy Contrast tutorial. Heavy Contrast is a series where I try to paint one miniature to the highest standard possible using just contrast paints and highlights. And for this episode I'm going to paint one of the most beautiful minis released by Games Workshop ever, and this is Prince Duvalle from the Crimson Code. So let's get cracking. As you can see, we're starting from a zenithal priming. This was done with mechanical standard grey spray all over and grey sear just from the top. And I'm going to start with the skin as usual. And this is a mix of 1 part dark old flesh, 2 parts basilicanum grey, and 3 parts contrast medium. I will make sure this gets into, especially around his hair and all of his neck. It's very important because we won't have good access to these bits afterwards, so we need a solid coat there, and the rest I will just apply as usual. And as usual, of course, I will apply it to an area, and then I will go back and absorb any excess. We don't want a lot of pooling here, just the right amount basically. When that dries, if you have messed up any of the armor areas like I've done here in his back and here on his hand, you can just take a bit of grey sear and just glaze it around those areas. This is the kind of consistency I'm using, and I have the brush quite a bit loaded, and I will just apply this here to more or less camouflage that mistake. Once this dries, it will look pretty similar, and once we apply the red all over, it will more or less disappear. Our layer of dark wood flesh and basilicanum grey over all the flesh is almost dry, and I'm going to start applying glazes over that to accentuate some of the details. For example, the tip of his fingers, I'm going to do a glaze using basilicanum grey. This is the sort of consistency, super thin. I'm using Lamian medium to thin this down to this consistency, but you can use contrast medium if you want. I just want his fingers to appear like they are turning darker and darker towards the tips. So I'm just processing this. Once this dries, I will keep applying layers until I'm happy with them. Those glazes are now done, and it's a very subtle, but I think it looks really cool. Now I'm going to use Black Templar to paint his nails. Just basically going to do a drop of Black Templar at the tip of each finger. Of course, just on the outside. For the next glazes, I'm going to concentrate just on his face, and for this I'm going to use Flestirus Red. This is the kind of consistency, almost not there. And I'm just going to do a very subtle glazes on his face, like here at the sides, a little bit around at the around his nose, at the bottom lip, and on his and around his eyes. With all the flesh now base coated and shaded and glazed, I'm going to start highlighting it, and for this I'm going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Ulthuan Grey and Pallid Witch Flesh. I find Pallid Witch Flesh to be a bit too reddish. This is the kind of consistency I'm going to use, just in case. So you see it's thinned down. And I'm going to concentrate these highlights towards the points where more light will naturally deposit. And to highlight the more reddish areas, like under his eyes and his lips, I'm going to use Pallid Witch Flesh. Just a tiny dot there. And I'm also going to use this to paint his teeth. Just there, tiny highlight. And just for his eyes, I'm going to use Flask Kids Yellow. I'm just going to pick up his eyeball basically with this. With the flesh now done, I'm going to start base coating all of the cloth details. And I'm going to start with this cape or skirt or whatever. And for this I'm going to use a mix of 2 parts Basilicanum Grey and 1 part Pterodon Turquoise as a starting base coat. A trick for these larger surfaces is move your brush in the direction you want the paint to be deposited. So in this case, from the top to the bottom, that will drag more paint there and produce that gradient that you want. And I am applying quite a bit of paint, and then I'm going to go back and absorb any excess or from what is pulling too much, or simply where I don't want that much paint. You have to do this before it dries, so it's very important you work in sections. And for the rest of the cloth details, that is leather and so on, and his pants of course, I'm going to paint them straight at black. So before applying our black tempered contrast paint, I'm going to darken those areas using Basilicanum Grey. That way we will get a deeper black once this is all done. And I'm going to be very careful not to touch any of the red armor if I can. Our layer of Pterodon Turquoise and Basilicanum Grey is now dry, and I'm going to apply a second one over all his clothes. This will be a mix of 1 part Black Templar and 1 part Contrast Medium. Again, I'm going to try and be as careful as possible around the armor especially. And for all the pure black details, I'm just going to take pure Black Templar and do a layer over all those details. Again, being extremely careful around the armor especially. There's only one main base coat to do, That is all of his armor, so I'm going to take care of that now. You may be able to see that I made a couple of mistakes with the black temper, that I went over parts that will be red, but as those are just in the edge, I can just hide them with the highlights. So I'm not going to really care too much unless it's on like a center panel. So I'm just going to apply a layer of lustrous red over all the armor. I'm not going to be concerned about the parts that will be gold. Just want the nicest, most uniform red coat I can get. So I'm going to go section by section, as I always do. And once that is done, I'm going to go back with my brush and take away any excess or extra pudding where I don't want it. Lustrous red does look brighter, much brighter when it's wet than when it dries. When it dries, if you let it pool too much, you will end up with very dark recesses. So be aware of that. All our contrast layers are now completely dry, and I'm going to start highlighting the red armor. I'm going to start with the armor because that's the part I'm most excited about. I love painting red, that's why I'm choosing it first. And I'm going to start with the glaze of Evilson Scarlet. You can see the sort of consistency I'm using here. And I'm going to use this to do a volumetric highlight on the panels. So I'm moving my brush in the direction I want the highlights to be. Just like this. And once that first pass dries, I will do another one and another one until I'm happy with the results. I will keep on adding this highlight all over the armor, but just for the sake of making this video quicker to make, I'm just going to jump into the next highlight, and this will be Wild Rider Red. And what I will do with Wild Red is a couple of things. First of all, let's do a very thin edge highlight. So you now want to make the thinnest edge highlight you can. And also on the more rounded surfaces, like here on his shin, I'm going to thin it down to the same sort of consistency I did for the Evilson Scarlet. And I'm going to glaze a smaller highlight, just in the middle of the previous one. As always, moving the brush in the direction you want the highlight to be. So from the outside of that Evilson Scarlet, highlight onto the middle. There is very little paint on my brush. With Wild Rider Red highlight now done, I'm going to move into Tau Light Ochre. And this will be basically an edge highlight. Again, super thin as you can make it. And this time I will be concentrating this towards the very edges and corners. Here for the rounded bits, I'm not going to thin it down as much as I did previously. Just like that. So a thin consistency, but not like a glaze or anything. And I'm just going to paint a teeny tiny bit there and round that like a small line. And now for the final highlight on the armor, I'm just going to use Kislev flesh, and I will do very small dots of Kislev flesh in the corners. And I will also do a very small dot in each of the rounded surface volumetric highlights. With all the steps of the armor done, I'm going to move into showing you how to paint all the black leather or all the black cloth. And for this I'm going to start highlighting it using Mechanical Standard Grey. I'm basically just going to pick up the edges here. Nothing fancy. With that done, I'm going to move into Administratum Grey, and I'm going to try and do, as I did with the red armor, the thinnest edge highlight I can. Basically trying to go inside of the Mechanical Standard Grey line. And for the last highlight on the black details, I'm going to use Fulthuan Grey. And I will just do very small dots of Fulthuan Grey. Just there on the creases of on the edge of the creases. And I'm going to move into the greenish, greyish skirt. And for this I'm going to use Sons of Horus Green to do an edge highlight all over these. If you want to add a volumetric highlight, the only thing you have to do is thin this down to a kind of glazed consistency like this, and just apply thin glazes of this, moving your brush from the shadows into the light, just like that. And once that layer dries, I will do more. And if you want, you can add some weathering with this Sons of Horus greens as well. Especially here near the bottom. Just adding some scratches and random dots. But also you can add this towards the highlights. It will, adding this kind of texture will also help mask any not perfect blends. For our next highlight on the green-grey cloth, I'm going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Sons of Horus Green and Ulthuan Grey. And I will just keep on doing this very thin edge highlight. And you can also add a bit of volumetric highlighting, thinning this down to a glaze consistency. This time it has to be a kind of a glaze because this is very light. So we will just be adding a bit of random volumetric highlights here and there. And you can also keep on doing the weathering, especially where you feel like a scratch meets an edge, do a dot there. With a grey-green cloth now painted, I'm going to base coat all the brown leather details, and from this I'm going to just do a layer of Gurgrant fur over the previous Basilicanum grey layer. With all of that out of the way, it's now time to base coat all the gold details, and for this I'm going to use a 1-to-1 mix of Retributor Armor and Stormhold Silver. This is really close to Liberator Gold, but covers like a dream. So I really prefer to use this instead. With all the gold now base coated, I'm going to shade it. For this I'm going to use a mix of 1 part Wildwood and 4 parts Contrast Medium. I'm just going to apply this all over the gold details. Once this first layer dries, I'm going to apply a second one, but this time instead of going all over, I'm going to be more selective. So as you can see, just here on the recesses here on the wings, basically emphasizing all the shadow areas. Also note that I also applied this wash over these horns that he has on his armor, but I won't apply a second coat all over them. With that wash now completely dry, I'm going to move into highlighting all the brass trim, and for this I'm going to use Canoptic Alloy, and I'm thinning it down to this sort of super thin consistency, and I will apply glazes of this towards the highlight areas. Just like that. You can even go over some of the shading, creating a softer transition. Remember to move your brush always towards the direction you want your highlights to be, never in the opposite direction. And on top of this, of course, I'm going to do an edge highlight on all the details. You can always feather it out if you feel the transition is not good enough. But it's just a matter of keep going, highlighting all the details basically. Our highlight with Canoptic Alloy is now finished, and I'm going to finish my brass, gold, bronze, trim, whatever, with Stormhold Silver. And I will just do a very small highlight of Stormhold Silver in the brightest parts of the metal. With those details out of the way, I'm going to paint these horns that he has on his armor. And remember, these were base coated with the same Wildwood and medium mix I used for the bronze trim. And I'm going to highlight them using Rakarth Flesh. I'm just going to paint some lines running down the bottom, just like that. And now I'm going to highlight them even more using Palletwood Flesh. Just keep making those same lines a bit thinner and starting from a bit lower down. With the bones finished, I'm going to highlight these leather pouches, and I'm going to show you another method of highlighting contrast paints that works with every single contrast color. This is mixing it with regular acrylics. I'm going to use for the first highlight a 1-to-1 mix of Palletwood Flesh and Gurgrant Fur. This will of course be a bit thinner than what you are used to with a regular paint, so it might take a couple of layers to catch, but it will cover and it will provide a very natural looking highlight. And for the next highlight I'm going to use a 2-to-1 mix of padded witch flesh and Gergrant affair. You can just mix a bit of Gergrant and padded witch flesh on the palette. You really don't need to mix a whole bunch, but I did just to showcase to you a perfect replicable mix, but you can just use like progressive mixing, that also works very well. And now I'm going to use pure padded witch flesh and I will just do the smallest highlights. Just basically small dots of this in the corners and those kinds of things. Our highlights are done, but they look a bit out of place, but that has an easy solution. I'm turning my Gergrant affair into a sort of glaze like this, and I'm going to brush it over all of the highlights, and magically those highlights will feel integrated and will have a beautiful leather tone. With the leather now finished, I'm going to move into one of the last details, and I'm going to start with the steel, and I'm going to base coat all the steel areas using iron hand steel. I know this detail is painted like as a glass vial on the box art, but I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to make it steel. I am very lazy. With all our steel parts now base coated, I'm going to start shading them. For all these random bits around him, I'm going to use a 3-to-1 mix of contrast medium and black temper. This is 3 parts contrast medium and 1 part black temper. But for the main sword, I'm going to use straight up black temper. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to apply it, I'm going to clean my brush very quickly, I'm going to soak up any excess, and then I'm going to feather out this black temper. So I'm going to do this here, and you have to choose one pattern. I'm going to do this simple one, which is dark light, dark light, dark light, opposed. Just like that. And it's very important that you now leave this to dry very, very well before touching it. And I'm going to drop black temper here on the fuller of the sword. Don't be too careful here, because we are going to cover this again with iron hand steel, so if you mess up when you apply it to the fuller, it's not that such a big deal. So this first layer of black temper is now dry, and I'm going to apply a second one in the same way. Just reinforcing that black up here. Our TMM pattern is now being laid down, and I'm going to correct and refine everything using iron hand steel. I have my iron hand steel thinned down so it's a bit transparent, and I'm going to glaze it towards the top. So I'm going to start about the mid transition and move my brush towards the point where I want more light. This way we can correct these tiny mistakes that happened here and make the transition look much nicer. I will also edge highlight the blade now. And all of a sudden, with that edge highlight, you can see the sword now looks much nicer. Of course, don't forget to edge highlight the rest of the details using iron hand steel. With that done, I'm going to take Stonehold Silver and do the final highlight on all the steel details, including the sword. For the sword, I'm going to lay it down here on the tip a bit. If you feel there's a bit of transition, metallic paints dry slower, so you can just feather it out. And don't forget to, of course, edge highlight the sword. Now there's only just one detail left, and this is all the dropped gems. So the first step will be to base coat all those gems that you want to be, well, like gems, using Ulthuan Grey. You can use Corax White or Grey Seer if you want, but I have Ulthuan Grey on my palette and that is good enough. And for the gem effect, you want to cover the whole gem in one brushstroke, and I will try to move my brush from the bottom to the top, so that will create a natural gemstone shading in one go. Just like that. Once this first layer dries, I'm going to do the second one, but this time I will do like I did on the sword. I will apply more Achillean green here on the top, and then I will feather it out. And I will repeat this until I'm happy with the darkness at the top of the gems. Now I'm going to highlight all the gems. For this I'm going to use Ulthuan Grey, and I will do a very small line of Ulthuan Grey at the bottom of each gem. And for the last step, I'm going to take pure white and I'm going to do the final highlight. And I'm going to do one dot at the bottom, in the middle of the Ulthuan Grey highlight, and one dot at the very top in the darkest bit. So with that last step done, and the base painted. By the way, if you want to see how I painted the base, it's basically done in exactly the same way as the Curse City bases. This mini was probably one of the most challenging and fun minis that I have painted for the heavy contrast tutorials. I'm really pleased with this and I really hope you also enjoy this video. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Bye! Do you like my videos and want to help me make them? Well, there are several ways you can do that. You can follow me on social media, you have the links to all my social media in the description below. You can also check all my affiliate links in the pinned comment of this video. Use those links in your next hobby purchase and help me without any additional cost to you. I finally have a link for the brushes that I use down there. Don't forget to check the merch that you can see just below this video in the shop tab of my channel. But most importantly, there is Patreon and channel members. You have the link to my Patreon in the description below and in the pinned comment of the video, or if you prefer, you can just click the join button below this video. Patreon and channel members help me do all the cool projects that I want to make and help me improve the quality of my videos. Don't be afraid, no content will ever be hidden behind a paywall, but it's a nice way to help me. You will get something back for generosity. As I said, guys, thank you very much for watching. A special thank you to Heather Amster, Lawrence Sigismundi, Nicholas Furnell, Tyrannosaur, Christoph Moret, Javi Mota, Keen Anderson, Michael Boye, Table Miniatures, Thomas Ustegard, Veldrain, Victor Domena, Equitas, Arunder, Carlos Rivera, Charles Armintage, Chris Fyvid, Kieran O'Murthal, Darcy Farrar, Dr. V, Gareth Smith, G4, Jamie Milligan, Joe Simpson, JT Butler, Kevin Mian, Kevin Sulas, Donald Lindemann, Mark Jarvis, Matthew Miller, Natius Maximus, Oscar Jonathan Thomberg, Samuel, Sasha Park, Supernev, and Vilkas Ward for being the coolest persons in the planet. Be like these fine folks on my Patreon and take control.